everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Robinson Run. I'm your host, Brady Kreitzer. I am a historian of the American frontier, studying the 18th century frontier, especially during the American Revolution, the 7 Years' War, and the Whiskey Rebellion. Today is our very first profile of a family here on Robinson Run, and we're going to begin with an analysis of a man named James Ewing, who by the end of this video will be known as Squire James Ewing. He'll be one of the earliest settlers to come to Robinson Run, and he'll become one of the most powerful and prominent landowners throughout the history of this story. I'm coming to you today from Calora, Maryland, outside of Calora, Maryland, in Cecil County. And this is a very important area because this is the origin of the James Ewing story. Now, in a previous video, episode 1, we were on location in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We looked at the Octorara community, and we saw that many of the Robinson Run settlers were transplanted from that community. James Ewing will not be from that community, but he will be from a very similar one. Now, I've talked a lot already about the Scots-Irish, their view of the world. That's all incredibly important for this story, so you can't get enough of it. But here in Calora County, Maryland, we have what is originally the West Nottingham Presbyterian Church, or West Nottingham Community. And this is the world in which James Ewing is born into in 1732. So for some perspective, what else is going on in colonial America in 1732? Well, of course, George Washington is born that same year. He's born just 4 months earlier than James Ewing. So these are going to be men raised in the Revolutionary generation. But when James Ewing's born here, again in Cecil County, Maryland, in 1732, he's going to be, really living in a tumultuous world. Because even though we are well below the Pennsylvania border today, and in point of fact, Chesapeake Bay's about 10 miles to my south, 10 to 12 miles to my south. Believe it or not, in the 1730s, when his family moves here from the UK, this is a Pennsylvania land grant, even though it's below the Maryland border. In an earlier video, episode 2, in which we entitled Land, I explained the Pennsylvania-Maryland border dispute, and I could run through it very quickly here. There was a band of territory claimed by both the colonies of Pennsylvania and the colonies of Maryland. And what happened was a lot of political turmoil. Pennsylvania agents would say, well, this land is deeded to one party. Maryland land agents would say, no, this land is deeded to another. And when it came time for tax time, the poor people caught in the middle, like here in Cecil County, ended up having to usually pay both taxes, or maybe pay 2 penalties to each colony depending on who they sided with. This, of course, was settled in 1767 by the Mason and Dixon expedition, which drew the border there. But that's the kind of tumultuous world that Ewing is born into. And it's a kind of tumult that the Scots-Irish are very used to, especially coming from the UK, where they were really second-class citizens. Now, in the 1740s, the West Nottingham parish, which, again, we are relatively near the site of today, will suffer a similar kind of unrest. Because in 1741, the West Nottingham parish, the one that James Ewing, then 9 years old, was a part of, schismed and broke into 2. And those 2 communities, and we cannot stress how devastating a split like this could be for a community, because for the Scots-Irish, again, their church was effectively their nation. It was their country. It's where they handled their politics. It's where they handled their cultural disputes, property disputes, land boundaries, deeds. I mean, it was the center of their life. And for that community to split was something that was tremendously upsetting and traumatic for the communities there. So all of that is to say, to paint a picture of who James Ewing is and what world he's born into, we want to understand why he picks up and moves nearly 300 miles from where we are right now in Maryland to Robinson Run outside of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. And I think with a little bit of understanding of the general unrest that's happening there, you are going to see that. Now, in 1771, again, James Ewing is still here in Maryland. He's going to marry a woman named Mary McCown, and in total, they're going to have 9 children. And right around that same year, obviously 1771, we have kind of an understanding of what's going on in America. It's a lot of turmoil. It's a lot of unrest. The American Revolution is upon us, and lots of different people are going to be moving for a lot of different reasons. James Ewing, his wife, Mary Ewing, Mary McCown, will pack up their things from here in Maryland. It's cold. It's just starting to rain. And they will move with about 17 other families into the West. And those people will move into different regions. But the Ewings will settle on the region just outside of Pittsburgh. Very open, very available, recently so by the Treaty of Fort Stanwix signed with the Iroquois, available land. And they're going to pack up and they're going to make the 300-mile journey into the West. But I wanted to give you a good sense of where they came from, and more importantly, the circumstances here in Cecil County, Maryland, that really pulled them apart. Now remember, the Ewings are going to be coming from Maryland, a colony that legalizes slavery. And Pennsylvania does too at that time. But unlike the people we've already seen, the people that came from Octorara Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the Ewings are going to bring enslaved people with them. And when Ewing moves into the West, these enslaved peoples are going to be critical parts of how he tames and conquers the wilderness. Now, in later episodes of Robinson Run, I'm going to do a deep dive on who these enslaved peoples were, because they've been lost to history too long. But this will be a major difference between James Ewing and the other people we see. Very importantly, when Ewing moves to Pennsylvania, much like Maryland was not Maryland in the time, Pennsylvania is not Pennsylvania in the time either. He's going to be moving to what is actually claimed by Virginia. So when you look at the original land grants that Ewing gets and the other 17 families that will move with him, they are going to be deeded that land or given that land or purchased that land from the colony of Virginia. It's a Virginia land grant. And when you study the Robinson Run community, and we're going to do it over the next, obviously, several episodes, the rest of this series, you got to get used to the fact that even though you are outside of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania today, you're going to be dealing with land grants almost entirely given by the colony of Virginia. And I have an image of one you can look at here, very similar to this. This is a real state of flux for the American colonies. In just 10 years, the American colonies won't exist anymore. They'll be, again, the United States of America. But this is part of the reason why I'm studying Robinson Run. Because yes, it's just a 5 to 6 mile long creek in the middle of the frontier. But people like James Ewing are really going to be the tip of the spear, as I like to say, leading toward a new kind of American society that's forged in the West. Now, when James Ewing first moves to western Virginia or western Pennsylvania today, he's not going to settle on Robinson Run, not at first. But he's going to take his wife, Mary, many of his cousins, and he's going to settle first about 6 miles away in what is today Moon Township, Pennsylvania, about 6 miles north of Robinson Run. Because he's going to realize there is a powerful resource that, as a Scots-Irishman, he never had really title to before, and he does now, and that's going to be land. When James Ewing lived here in Virginia, his people, the Scots-Irish, were mostly tenant farmers, meaning they worked the land, they poured their heart and soul into the land, but they did not own it. It was owned by somebody else. And that's very similar to what his ancestors experienced in the UK. They never owned land there either. So land is always going to be the pull and land is always going to be the draw. But for Ewing, moving into western Pennsylvania, land is going to be his resource. He's going to bring his family with him. He's going to bring the men and women he enslaves with him. Again, he's a Marylander, and that's going to matter, especially in the ways he views slavery. And for the rest of his life, by the way, he will enslave those people all the way into the 19th century. We will tell their story, I promise you. We will not lose them. But it's an interesting idea, and it begins here, not in western Pennsylvania, but the Ewing story, the Robinson Run story, the man that will become this land baron and really the anchor of the Robinson Run community and the people all around him, starts here about 10 miles north of the Chesapeake Bay in Cecil County, Maryland. Stay tuned, because our next stop, and this will be a lot easier for you than it was for me, is going to be his original settlement in Moon Township, Pennsylvania. And we're going to look at what he does there as really the first man with his boots on the ground in the West. Here we are. We are here at the site of Ewing's Mills Road outside of Moon Township, Pennsylvania. And this will be the site of James Ewing's initial settlement here in western Pennsylvania. Now, we are about 6 miles from Robinson Run. It's about 6 miles to our south. But as you can see, this is a very lovely and beautiful location. I'm actually walking on the Montour Trail right along Montour Run. And this is where James Ewing will first make his settlement here in the West. Now, this matters for a few reasons, and I want to talk about this a few different ways. James Ewing is really the tip of the spear of Scots-Irish settlement here in western Pennsylvania, and certainly in the region in and around Robinson Run. Today it's windy, it's cold. I like to show off certainly where I live so you can see the places that I visit every day, how beautiful it is. It's really spectacular. But this is very much what James Ewing would have seen, and it would have taught him a very important lesson about life in the West. And that lesson is a basic formula, and that is that land equals power. It's as true now as it ever was. But here along the Montour Run, we're about 3 miles or so from the Ohio River. And James Ewing also learns that accessibility equals money. Land equals power, accessibility equals money. So here along the Montour Run, really at this very spot, James Ewing is going to establish a grist mill. And a grist mill is one of those kind of low-risk operations for life here in the West. If you have running water, flowing water, it's going to be very easy money for you. And hopefully, since he's one of the first, he would be the place that people would come to not only buy grain that has been properly milled and sifted, but bring their own to be milled and sifted. So he wouldn't just be a landowner that made money buying and selling agricultural goods, but he would kind of be his own little industry here in this region. Now, James Ewing will, again, as one of the first people here, along with his brother Alexander, really make a nice little spot for himself here. But it's also, again, at this moment that James Ewing's legend begins to grow, because he will be one of the largest landowners in this entire region. I mean, Robinson Run, as I mentioned, is about 6 miles away from us. He'll own thousands of acres here. And that desire for land, and dare I say greed for land, and greed is not always a bad thing, is it's gonna make him such a prominent community leader for generations to come. But here along the Montour Run, as you can see in the video, I had my lovely assistant take some footage of our drive. That was not me filming, just so you know. I'm a very conscientious and safe driver. You can see we had to drive down a very plunging valley to get here to the site of James Ewing's grist mill, his original settlement. And the guy's name is all over the place. We, of course, on the way here, had to take the exit for Ewing Road. That's named after James Ewing. And we are currently on Ewing's Mills Road. So, the 18th century has an interesting way of leaving its legacy here. But I really wanted to bring everyone here to this spot. One, because it's so spectacularly beautiful. But two, because this is the location. I mean, this is the place that James Ewing first put down roots. And his grist mill was a staple of this community, much in the way that he is. So as we continue our examination of Ewing's life, we're going to see how he expands from this location, Ewing's Mill, and today outside of Moon Township, Pennsylvania, and really grows to the Robinson Run area, because that's going to be our next stop. So hang out, we'll be there in a second. We have arrived here on the banks of Robinson Run, and we are on, of course, the bulk, the major part of James Ewing's land holding here, and the place that still bears his name. The town we're in today is technically part of Collier Township, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, but locally it's called Ewingsville, and you can imagine why. We're sitting on about a 1,600 acre plot of ground that covers at least a third of the banks of Robinson Run, owned by James Ewing. He called this designation Mill Mount. We are in the St. John Cemetery here, which again is smack dab in the middle of James's property. And it's a cemetery that has served this community for about 200 years. Now, James Ewing will build his empire, if you would, in this region here. And he'll actually take on the nickname Squire James Ewing. And that's because he will be just a tremendous landowner here. And he will be a community leader for the better part of 30 years. He'll first move here in 1770. And as we just left, he had a successful grist mill about 6 miles away at Ewing's Mill in today Moon Township, Pennsylvania. Now, I had an easy ride to get here right down Interstate 79. And just for some perspective, Robinson Run is here to my south, just behind me, just across the road there. Interstate 79 is about 400 yards to my west. And again, when you hit the end, or what is about Interstate 79 running north to south, you also reach the end of Robinson Run. So James Ewing was very sure and very careful that he owned both sides of Robinson Run for again, at least a third of the entire length of the 4 mile stretch. Because again, that was usable bank line. That was money. That was going to be highly effective in the form of mills and resources there. But I do want to use this moment to talk a little bit about Squire James Ewing's role in this community, because being a community leader in the Scots-Irish world is far more than just owning land, but it's a communal position. It's generally chosen by the members of the community, and it comes with heavy responsibility. Now, about 300 yards from where I'm standing right now, James Ewing will maintain a large, what we'll call fortified log cabin. And it'll be called Ewing's Fort. Now, this is not an enormous fort. This is not something you'd see that could withstand a large-scale military attack. It's more of a fortified home. And today, Ewing's Fort is possessed by, of course, it's gone 250 years later, the Crystal Springs Water Company. But on that site was what was called Ewing's Fort. It was his big initial cabin he built in this area. And that was a very important position. As you can hear, the elements are picking up today. It's cold, it's windy, but you're seeing this region in its sort of autumn glory. Ewing's Fort was the location where this community here on Robinson's Run would flee in the event of a catastrophe or an unexpected attack. Most notably, the threat were Native American warriors, indigenous warriors in this region, allied, again, it's about 1770, right? Allied with the British Empire during the American Revolution. So Ewing's Fort sat at the far western edge of Robinson Run. And it sat where Robinson Run effectively met the Chartiers Creek. Now remember the lesson we talked about earlier, right? Land equals power. And my gosh, does Ewing have a lot of it here. But accessibility also equals money. So Robinson Run connects to the Chartiers Creek. The Chartiers Creek connects to the Ohio River. And the Ohio River, of course, was the gateway to the west. It goes all the way to the Mississippi. It was a critical part of America's internal kind of commercial infrastructure, if you would. And it's very in its very early stages at this point. But James Ewing was well positioned to do that because, again, remember, he had the grist mill further away in Moon Township along the Ohio River along Montour Run, and he's got several profitable enterprises here along Robinson Run. And both of that's going to lead him to major commercial opportunities on the Ohio River. But Ewing's Fort, as it's called, was a fortified house. And again, if there was ever trouble here, if there were ever problems here on this property, because he's not alone, it was his responsibility, Squire James Ewing, to welcome his neighbors into that position and protect them. As a general rule, I want to explain this. When you're on the frontier, names of forts matter. So if the word fort comes before the title, like Fort Pitt or Fort Duquesne or Fort Bedford, okay, that means it's a government installation. It was paid for by the British government or the French government or the federal government. If the person's name comes first, like Ewing's Fort, for example, it's really not much of a fort. It's more of a fortified house, but a collectively agreed spot for people to meet and take cover. So we're here on the far western edge of Robinson Run. All of this land is James Ewing's Mill Mount property. And he's the head honcho here. He's the chief here. We're going to continue with the story of Robinson Run for the next 30 years, and James Ewing is going to be at the center of a lot of it. Again, he was the earliest settler in this region that we can talk about. Other people settled here really in sort of a way at his pleasure. He was something of a boss here that ruled over this area, but that was very common in Scots-Irish communities here in the first American West. So Ewing's Fort, for position, right near roughly the site where Noblestown Road meets Interstate 79, or where Robinson Run behind me meets the Chartiers Creek. And that was the safety zone, that was the safe haven, the sanctuary for this whole region. But James Ewing's legacy is all around us. And he, again, represents that sort of godfather almost like position, that boss position here in Robinson Run. So that'll give you a nice satisfactory introduction to James Ewing, who we will see a lot again in the future. And I hope you join us next time on Robinson Run.